Jackson, 24 years old, is a troubled young woman who has a lot of problems in life. One day, she ties a noose to her fan and doesn't hesitate to hang herself. However, the fan falls from the ceiling and she lands on her feet, ruining her plans. Meanwhile, in another town, a man named Sam Gladwell returns home to his wife, Deborah, who barely pays any attention to anything he says. Later, Deborah completely shuts Sam up, saying that she can't concentrate on her work with him chattering away in the background. Even though he's secretly hurt, Sam only focuses on her newly opened package, which contains some cowboy boots that don't suit him at all. Back at Jackson's messy apartment, things aren't looking too good. She's now stuck with a broken ceiling fan and her crippling depression. Desperate for some company, she calls her mother, but she's promptly dismissed. For this reason, she calls her dealer Tony and casually asks him if he wants to hang out later that night, but instead he reminds her of a chapel party he's invited to. Still, Jackson remains persistent and asks Tony if he wants to hang out before the party, but he says they don't have that kind of relationship and declines. Now realizing she has no one, Jackson sulks on the floor and cries out her frustrations. Meanwhile, at Sam's house, things aren't going well either when Deborah gets irritated that he bought sandwiches for dinner. Even though Sam bought food without her asking, his consideration is cast aside because sandwiches aren't dinner food. Even though this isn't the reaction he was expecting, Sam takes responsibility for his actions. Later on, receives a text from a woman named Addie Jackson, who claims to be his daughter. At first, Sam doesn't believe the text, but learns that Clarice Jackson is the mother, whom he dated for a year in college. When the truth finally sinks into his head, Sam agrees to meet his supposed daughter at the local park. Before he leaves, Deborah points out the cowboy shoes he is sporting and laughs at them. However, Sam continues to hang out in them. Moments later, Sam arrives at the park and finds that Jackson is already there. He immediately approaches his daughter and they catch up for a bit, until he backs out of the whole parenting situation. For this reason, Jackson argues that she has no intention of moving in with him, but his indecisiveness. The father says he didn't even know she existed and that it's all too sudden. As they decide to go their separate ways, an extremely disturbing and gruesome event occurs before their eyes across the street. Sam and Jackson see a man with a huge mouth swallow a girl alive. As if this wasn't already a horrifying scene, the man quickly walks towards them, forcing Sam and Jackson to go to their cars separately and flee. Later that night, Sam becomes ill thinking about the incident in the park, while Jackson investigates about the man. With 2 cigarettes in her mouth, she concentrates on her work but finds nothing useful. Suddenly, she hears a knock at the door, so she bravely opens it and finds no one outside. Thinking she is now safe, Jackson attempts to walk back to her computer when the man from the park suddenly bursts into her house and soon opens his huge mouth. He walks towards Jackson, holding a broom to defend herself, and when she fails to stab him, she is left with no choice but to run out of her house and head to Sam's. Not long after, Jackson welcomes himself into her father's house and surprises him by making a midnight snack. Although Sam is confused as to how she got in, Jackson simply insists on what happened earlier and convinces him to leave, or they'll be eaten too. However, Sam doesn't want to go with her, and it's not long until they start arguing and yelling. The ruckus wakes Deborah up, finding the two of them together and now thinking of Jackson as a lover. However, Jackson simply introduces herself as Sam's daughter, which draws attention and she is shocked. Later, Sam emphasizes that he doesn't want to leave, so Jackson threatens him with a sharp knife. Because of that, he pathetically tries to throw a small butter knife at his daughter, which barely hurts her. As Jackson forces her father to put his shoes on, Deborah looks out the window and sees the man with the huge mouth approaching her house. Thinking the man is after him and Jackson, Sam has no choice but to leave to ensure his wife's safety. However, Deborah hands him a ridiculous hat to put on before they leave. A few moments later, Sam is in the passenger seat as his daughter drives to the chapel party, where they picks up Jackson's friend Lotus. Jackson explains that Lotus is an expert on paranormal phenomena, who they have tons of books that can help them figure out who the man in the park is. On the way to the party, Sam receives a call from his wife, but Jackson tells him not to take it and keep their location confidential. However, the missed call makes Deborah anxious, so she leaves a voicemail for her husband. Later, Sam texts her his current location, and she immediately heads out to go after them. Soon after, Sam and Jackson arrive at the chapel party, where there are tons of alcohol, drugs, trash, people, and posters of Jesus and the crucifix. After swimming through the blasphemous display, they finally find Lotus and tell him that they need him to assess a paranormal situation. Although Jackson has only introduced the young girl in the park, Lotus immediately concludes that it is a Rixella, an interdimensional parasite that feeds on people. However, Jackson tells him that it is not about the girl, but about the man with the huge mouth, and she goes on and explains it in detail. But Lotus gets distracted when he notices a guy trying to drug a girl at the party. Because of that, Lotus grabs the girl's glass and drinks it himself, making him feel drugged and unable to help Sam and Jackson. Shortly after, Lotus confronts the guy who then punches him in the face. However, with all the alcohol and drugs giving him confidence, he bites the guy's leg, making him bleed. The scene quickly turns chaotic, so Sam and Jackson drag Lotus out of the party and take him to their house. On their way to their emaciated partner's house, they find the girl from the park and immediately approaches her. Although the girl appears scared and confused, Jackson relentlessly questions her while Sam counters with a softer approach. Throughout their conversation, they find out that the girl's name is Birch and that she needs help finding her parents. While Sam tells Jackson to change his intimidating tone, Chompy, a name they use to refer to the man with big mouth, suddenly appears and walks quickly towards them. Because of this, they drag Birch into the car with them and immediately escape. Later, they arrive at Lotus' house, and Jackson immediately separates from the group to secretly snort drugs, which Sam discovers her doing. Because of that, he takes the small Ziploc bag containing the drugs and pours it out, making Jackson angry. Soon after, they decide to enter the house, but Birch doesn't want to leave the car, so Sam takes her inside. Once inside the house, Jackson tries to get Lotus to sleep, and then checks one of her books that can help them figure out what Chompy is. However, when she leaves the room, she finds Birch hovering over Sam, who is on the ground with his eyes open and his body petrified. Birch immediately runs away after being caught, leaving Jackson worried about her father's condition. She later tries to touch his face, but when she hears no response, she begins to believe that Sam might be dead. However, Sam gasps loudly, which startles Jackson, but relieves her to know that he's alive. Later, when he explains that Birch might be a Rixella, he suddenly loses his balance and falls to the ground. He quickly takes off his left boot and is horrified to see that his foot has shrunk, making it look like a baby's. As he panics and screams, Jackson desperately tries to hold back her laughter by crumpling up a piece of paper and using it to stuff the gap in Sam's shoes. However, the situation is too much for Sam, so he texts Deborah to pick him up, but Jackson protests that his foot will stay like that and Chompy will keep coming to get him. Later, Jackson realizes that it's more the father-daughter relationship that matters than Sam wanting to retreat. This hurts and disappoints her, so she tries to leave the house, but immediately locks the door again when she finds Chompy outside. Limping, Sam goes outside to talk to Chompy while Jackson hides behind him, although he explains in detail how Birch attacked him and how he ended up with a small foot. The man just stares at them and doesn't say a word. Because of that, Jackson steps forward and asks Chompy if he needs their help. Suddenly, he smiles, kneels down, and then opens his massive mouth and points at her, suggesting that he wants them to go inside. Strangely, Jackson agrees and dives into the mouth, leaving Sam no choice but to go after her. Inside, Sam and Jackson discover that they are in another dimension, meaning that Chompy's mouth is a portal leading there. As they look around, they suddenly hear a voice that introduces itself as Talon. Talon cannot speak in his physical form, so he takes them to another dimension where he explains how he is in search of a Rixella. In this case, it is Birch, and her goal is to assimilate every human into an exact replica of herself. This would explain Sam's foot, which is an unfinished assimilation. Talon also explains that he will swallow assimilated victims and heal them, leaving them Rixella must be destroyed. However, he reminds Sam and Jackson that no one should be alerted his existence or the mission will be compromised. They both agree to this, leaving the dimension with a clear mind. As Sam and Jackson step out into the outside world, they laugh in joy, knowing that Chomp will take care of everything while they go on with their lives. Although he can't speak, tears of joy well up in Chompy's eyes and he leaves shortly after. Meanwhile, Deborah approaches Lotus' house and crashes into something huge. To Sam and Jackson's horror, it's their savior Chompy, and now Deborah has just killed him. Because of this matter, Jackson yells at Deborah, and then she tells Sam to help her move the body inside the house. Not knowing what to do next, the three of them get in a car and Jackson drives them to Peter's Pancakes because she hasn't eaten in 12 hours. Later, she gets upset at the diner and spills some syrup all over the table just to piss off Deborah and Sam. The waitress sees all of this, so Jackson, Sam, and Deborah have no choice but to leave and find Birch instead. In the car, Sam tells her which direction to go because he can feel it in his foot. True enough, they find Birch along with many other versions of herself. Later, Jackson manages to abduct one of them, and Deborah helps her put Birch in the trunk. However, a man witnesses the scene, so Jackson jumps on him and scares him off. Later in the car, Deborah and Sam talk about their unhealthy relationship and soon introduce themselves to the idea of getting a divorce. Jackson, who drives everyone to her house, awkwardly pretends that she isn't listening to them. Not long after, they arrive at their destination and immediately brings Birch inside and ties her up. But what they don't know is that Birch is summoning the other replicas of herself to head to Jackson's house. Soon, the place is surrounded by other Birch replicas, prompting Sam, Jackson, and Deborah to prevent them from entering. Meanwhile, Lotus calls Jackson and tells him that he found Chompy's body and that he can't get into his house because of the other Birch replicas. Later in the call, Jackson and Lotus conclude that the portal to Chompy's mouth might still be open, so throwing the girls inside might work. Suddenly, Sam realizes that he has lost sight of Deborah, and by the time he finds her, the replicas have already entered the house, and one is starting a simulation on Deborah's unconscious body. Seeing this, Sam attacks the replica and takes his wife to the bathroom, where they are temporarily safe. However, Jackson selflessly runs outside to throw the girls into Chompy's mouth manually. However, in doing so, she is pulled inside as well. Inside, she finds Birch, who then explains that something is driving her to do things she has no control over, such as transforming people into replicas of herself. Because of that, Jackson tells Birch to pass the burden on to her, and when the girl refuses, Jackson hugs her and allows Rixella to enter her body. Later, she tells Birch to leave as she summons the replicas of herself to enter Chompy's mouth. One by one, the assimilated people are healed, and soon after, Sam enters the portal after becoming a replicant. However, he suddenly sees Jackson in agony of pain. Seeing her daughter's situation, he walks over to her and successfully pulls Rixella out of her body, making her feel relieved but also weak. At first, they were unable to jump out of the portal, but then Lotus throws a rope inside and they successfully manage to get out alive. Outside, everyone is back to their old selves and Birch is finally reunited with his family. Meanwhile, Deborah and Sam push for a divorce, and Jackson also apologizes for her previous actions. She also admits to Sam that she needs help, so they rekindle their relationship. Eventually, Jackson addresses Sam as her father,